Stay up to date with what's happening in North Central Washington. Go to the NCW Life Community Calendar at ncwlife.com.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. The Pybus Public Market is pleased to offer a series of unique and fun classes for the Wenatchee Valley community. Classes are taught by local volunteers with an interest and aptitude in the subjects that they teach.
Hello, everyone. As it says, I'm Carolyn Johnson. I am here to talk to you about Doctors Without Borders, but specifically my experience working for them. So I have been working with Doctors Without Borders, also called MSF, which is the French acronym for Médecins Sans Frontières. I'm going to use the word MSF because it's way shorter and it's what people know throughout the world. So I've been working with them for the last 3 years. I've been in 4 projects over that time. I started out in Central African Republic on the outreach team, which is basically we provide support to health posts and health centers out in the bush. Then I went to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It was on the same team, or same kind of team, different team. Then I came back to Central African Republic and was actually a hospital supervisor. And then I just got back in December from the search and rescue boat in the Mediterranean off the coast of Libya, based out of Catania. So where I was, I don't have a pointer, but Central African Republic is right there. The Congo is right there. And where I was based out of, it was Sicily, and then off the coast of Libya, which is right there. So there are over 70 countries where MSF has projects, and those are noted in red. There's over 35,000 field positions, which means those are people that are working out in the field, and of those, only 8% are international staff. So that would be expat staff. Most of the people that work for MSF work in the country where we're actually working. So this is one person. This is me, okay? And what I want to do is start out with zooming out to the big picture of what MSF is. So I'm going to show a 5-minute video about MSF, what it is, where it is, how it works, so you get a better understanding of that. And then I'm going to zoom back into what MSF is for one person and what it's like to actually work for MSF. So this is me when I was on one of the outreach projects where we only could get where we needed to go on the motorcycle, and that box of medication is the medication that saves lives, and that's what MSF is all about. It's about saving lives.
Doctors Without Borders, also known internationally by our French name Médecins Sans Frontières, or MSF, is an independent medical humanitarian organization. Founded in 1971, MSF won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1999. Today we have some 33,000 staff on the ground in roughly 70 countries. We work in communities affected by war, natural disasters, disease outbreaks, chronic neglect, and other crises, treating people based on medical needs alone, regardless of race, religion, or political affiliation. MSF is set up to respond to emergencies and provide free, high-quality medical care to people in need. We have an extensive network of aid workers in projects all over the world, and emergency experts that stand ready to fly out at a moment's notice. MSF's logistical system sends medicines and materials as quickly as possible so our staff can start treating patients. The vast majority of MSF's funding comes from private donors, not governments. This financial independence means we can make prompt operational decisions based first and foremost on the medical needs on the ground, not on political considerations. Every day, MSF teams treat patients in a range of emergency situations. Nearly a third of our projects are in active conflict zones. Here, civilians are caught in the crossfire, unable to reach the healthcare services they urgently need. MSF leaders negotiate access to communities where the needs are greatest. We communicate with all parties to a conflict to explain MSF's guiding principles of neutrality, impartiality, and independence, along with the medical services we offer. In many places, this allows MSF to operate where other organizations can't. When an earthquake, hurricane, or other natural disaster hits, our emergency teams evaluate the situation on the ground to identify the most urgent needs. We then start treating the wounded and reinforcing battered medical systems as quickly as possible. For people affected by conflicts or natural disasters, we offer critical services such as surgery, maternal and pediatric care, vaccinations, and mental health counseling. We also focus on the particular needs of people displaced from their homes, including treatment for malnutrition, emergency obstetrical complications, and sexual violence. In 2014 and 15, MSF took the lead in responding to the massive Ebola outbreak in West Africa. At the same time, MSF teams elsewhere were building on years of experience and responding to diseases such as malaria, cholera, measles, HIV, and tuberculosis, diseases that are just as lethal as bombs and bullets if left untreated. For MSF, it's not enough to only treat the medical needs our teams see. We also advocate for our patients. That could mean drawing attention to whatever circumstances created urgent medical needs, or meeting with government officials or other members of the international community to push for patients to have access to health care. The message is always the same. People at risk should be able to access health care, and medical workers, even in active conflict zones, must be allowed to provide it. MSF also believes that life-saving medicines and vaccines must be affordable and accessible to people who need them most. MSF's Access campaign pushes governments and the pharmaceutical industry to put patients before profits when it comes to drug pricing and research and development priorities. Accountability is one of MSF's core principles, something that connects to everything else we do. We're extremely grateful for the support we receive from donors around the world, and we provide as much information about our work as we can through various platforms, including regular donor communications, the news media, social media, and public events. The ongoing support of our donors, together with the profound commitment of our aid workers, will allow MSF to provide independent and impartial assistance to people in crises for a long time to come. The future holds many challenges for people around the world, but we also know what's possible when we go where we're most needed, with the materials we need to deliver life-saving medical care.
That woman that's going like that, oops, I forgot to turn this back on, is the first woman, or first person to survive Ebola in the MSF camp. And so that's why she's going like that, because she made it, she lived. So, sorry about that, I'm not used to this kind of thing. So anyway, in review, MSF is a medical organization, it's humanitarian, it's international. We provide emergency aid to people who have been affected by conflict, whether it's armed conflict, epidemics, natural disasters, whatever it is, we're there. And we're there on three basic principles. One is neutrality, which means we don't take sides. Second one is impartiality, which means that we treat people regardless of whatever. So it doesn't matter, it's not based on their nationality, their gender, their religion, their political affiliations, where they come from, nothing. Everyone is treated exactly the same, and we treat them. And we're also independent, which means that most of our donations, over 90%, come from private donors, and there's no US government funds or political or religious influence on what we do, the money that we get.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Is your vehicle in need of a quick oil change or tune-up before hitting the road this summer? Stop by Quick Lube and Tune, the home of the good guys at 610 South Wenatchee Avenue.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
So I was mostly involved in projects that were related to armed conflict and exclusion from healthcare. So this is a stock MSF picture. It's not my picture because we were not allowed to take pictures of the UN or any military while I was there. But every capital city that I was in and all of the other cities, most of the time it looked just like this. So there's tanks going down the road and guns everywhere, but you just go along, and if you have your white vest and you're identified as MSF, pretty much people leave you alone and allow you to do the work that you need to do. I wanted to give a few definitions just because there's some confusion, and this is especially relevant to the work that we did on the boat, but also in the other countries. So a refugee is someone who has fled his or her country. They cannot return because of well-founded fear of persecution based on their race, their religion, nationality, or membership in a certain group. An asylum seeker is someone who wants refugee status. An irregular migrant is someone who's crossing borders. They don't have passports or documentation. And most of the time that's because it's stolen during the time that they're moving around, or they never had it to begin with. IDP is probably the biggest group that I worked with. Those are internally displaced people, which means that they fled just like refugees, but they never crossed a border. So they went from one side of the country to the other, and so they're in refugee camps as well, but they're called IDP camps. And a lot of towns are divided into IDP camps, and I'll show you how that works. The vulnerabilities that we pay most attention to are children, especially under 5s, unaccompanied minors, disabled, the elderly, which varies on the country that you're in, but is usually over 50, pregnant women, single parents with minor child, victims of human trafficking, torture, rape, or sexual violence, persons with serious medical or psychological illnesses, and also those with war-related injuries, political violence, imprisonment, detention. So those are the kind of the people that are identified as vulnerable and the ones that we really pay attention to. But we pay attention to everybody because we are totally impartial. Couple of interesting facts is that basically in the world there are 65 million displaced people, whether they're refugees or IDPs. This is throughout the world. But the thing that's most important is that most of the displaced people are in their country of origin. They have not left, so 40.3 million are still in their country. And 84% of the world's refugees who are not in their country are in the country right next door. So if you have, and actually the numbers of people that are traveling far away are small. This means that the countries right next door are also poor and don't have the capability to take care of those folks. So that's where the UN comes in and the other non-governmental agencies to help take care of and support those people. So now this is the personal part. So how does MSF respond? And MSF has a lot of teams in it, and the team that you often see that gets the big news is the E team, or the emergency team. I was not on that team. Most of the work that we do is in smaller teams or non-emergency teams. So basically MSF goes to where the problem is, and where the problem is usually means that it's not very accessible. So this was my second post. There was no airports, but there was one straight, almost straight stretch of land, or of asphalt. So when the plane would come in, which was about once a week, they'd block the traffic. The plane would land. The villagers are right there. They're looking at it. The plane would land, it would turn around, and then load up, and when it was ready to go, it would take off, and at that point, the road was unblocked, and then the cars could go back and forth. Sometimes there's actually an airport, and you can see that this is, these are small planes going huge distances, so when the plane lands, you have to fill it up with fuel again, and the fuel is in those barrels on the back of that truck. And the pilot's up on top, taking care of everything and making sure it's done correctly. This is the iconic MSF truck. It's a Land Cruiser. They go everywhere. The roads in developing countries are very bad, and they vary depending on the weather. So sometimes the roads are super great, like this one, where you can really zoom along, but most of the time they're not, and they look more like this. So when the roads look like this, the drivers have us get out, and we walk along the side, and then they do their work to get us through the mud. Sometimes it doesn't work, so they get stuck, and we got stuck in a lot of mud. And the drivers are unbelievable at getting us out of that mud, and we actually never got terminally stuck. We always got out. To get to certain areas where we're bringing care, you can't access it other than by motorcycle. And that was one of my big fears because I was in Peace Corps before, a long time ago, and I got in a really bad motorcycle accident. So the last thing I wanted to do was go on a motorcycle. And when I was applying for my position, I kept saying, no motorcycles, right? No motorcycles. No, 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 there's no motorcycles. They don't do that anymore. We stopped doing the motorcycles. And I get there, and the first thing they do is hand me a helmet, and they say, okay, now we're gonna do motorcycle training. And I was terrified, but I knew that the only way to get the medication out to the people was to go on the motorcycle. I was their supervisor, so I had to get over it. And I never drove, I was on the back. But even sometimes the motorcycles would get stuck. So there was a lot of bad mud. Sometimes we had to walk, and this is a typical bridge where the trucks would actually go through the river, and we would walk on a bridge that's close to it. And there were even some posts where we couldn't get there by any means except by canoe. And so this was where you're really accessing people who have no access to care. And the thing that I always thought about is if it takes us so much trouble to get to them, no wonder they're not coming into us where we have a big clinic or a big hospital or whatever it is, because they can't get there. And it's so difficult for us to get to them.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Get the fastest internet available in North Central Washington by switching to LocalTel and get speeds up to 1,000 meg. Call 888-8888 today or go online to localtel.net.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Mostly I was involved in primary health care. I'm a family nurse practitioner, so I was there supporting health centers and health posts. I was a supervisor, and basically it's a challenging job to work in a low resource setting like where I was. What happens is that here in the States you get used to having CT scans and MRIs and all these labs and x-rays and all this kind of stuff, and it just doesn't exist. And what you have to do, or it exists on a very small scale. And so what you have to do is go back to your basic clinical skills that you learned in the first day of nursing or medical school, and you rely on your good judgment, and you rely on what it most likely is. And MSF also has incredible protocols, so you have what you need to treat the most common thing with the thing that's going to work. It's amazing how they do it. The other problem, though, is that when you're working in a low resource setting, things tend to disappear. So there's a lot of theft, and one of the our jobs was to count everything. So you count stuff you take to the clinic, you count how much got used, you count how much got left over, but in the end, it works. So on this shelf right here, you can see this is malaria medication that's right there. These are antibiotics right here, and this is stuff for skin infections. And with those three things, you can treat an awful lot of what we see. There's also further down medication to treat diarrhea. So with very basic things, you can save lives. And that's the whole point of MSF, is saving lives. It's very rewarding because with just those tiny things, you can make a big difference. And that is really good. The hard part is that you can't treat everybody. And you can only treat the things that you can, and you have to let the rest go. And that's probably the hardest part. So how it works is you don't work by yourself, you work in a team. This is my outreach team. So here there are 2 nurse supervisors, 2 community health worker and supervisors, and 2 drivers. We always have to go in 2 cars for security, and in case we get stuck, you have to have someone to pull you out. And so we go out, and either we're out for a day or maybe for 3 or 4 days and stay overnight wherever we're going. But we work as a team. These are national staff people, so these are people who were in the Congo. They're from the Congo, they live there, but they're actually not living in the town where their family is. This is a typical health center. This is where we were going on the motorcycles. So we do not provide the health center to them, we provide the support. We're working in areas where because of armed conflict, the infrastructure for healthcare has completely collapsed. So the nurses aren't getting paid, there's no supplies, and so we come in and we don't do everything, because if we did everything, then they would just sit back and do nothing. So we provide the supplies, we provide the training, we provide the salaries, and then we work together to make the system work, with the idea that we at some point will be able to leave once the Minister of Health gets their act together. This is a typical team. This is 1 national staff who is on the left side, and the rest are nurses and midwives who are providing all the care in this particular health center. This is another health center, a little different look, a little different part of the country, but basically the same thing. So staffed by very small nurses, and there are no doctors that work in these clinics. So there really are no doctors. This is a waiting room, and because it's hot, a lot of things are done outside, so it's in the shade. This is an assessment for a malnutrition clinic. So the nurse is taking advantage of everybody being there, and he's doing education while we're weighing and measuring and doing all the other things that you do. A lot of what we do is prevention, and it's when people see all the photos of war and whatnot, and the big acute traumas and whatnot, that's what you see on TV. But what's happening parallel to that is people are having babies, and people are getting colds, and people are getting skin infections. And because of the lack of security in terms of food and where they're living and their displacement and everything gets much, much worse very quickly. So a lot of what we do is just doing pretty basic primary care stuff.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
For all the latest news in North Central Washington, go to ncwlife.com or find us on Facebook. Got a news tip? Email us at news@ncwlife.com or call 888-2020.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
This is a health post. So in this kind of a clinic, it's much smaller. It's usually staffed by 1 nurse, maybe 2, maybe a midwife. They have usually medications and stuff, or supplies to treat the big 3 things, which are malaria, diarrhea, and respiratory tract infections, as well as skin things. And then we also supported malaria posts. So this is where there's a small post that's staffed by a community health worker who has specialized training to diagnose and treat malaria and to recognize severe malaria so that they can refer into the big hospital. And we're basically working with people who have a 6th grade education and teaching them to do that, and it totally works, and we totally save a lot of lives that way. This is my role as a supervisor, was helping with patient care, but also mostly support. Here I'm holding a flashlight so that the nurse can see what he's doing. This is a child who was treated at home with traditional medicine for a while for just a tiny thing on his foot. It blew up into a big thing on his foot, and we found him, took him into the hospital. He was there for a few weeks, got IV treatment for his wound infection, and then we took him back to the health post where the nurse is going to continue to take care of him. And you can see he has no electricity, there's no running water, the floor is dirt, but he's able to actually do really good care with the teaching that we do and the supplies that we're able to bring to him. I think I already said that the #1 thing that we diagnose and treat is malaria. This is what kills kids, especially under 5. And so this is a nurse doing a malaria test in the light of the window. A mom and her children are waiting behind, and you can see the medication on the shelf. And it's pretty clear that this is probably a child that's just going to be simply treated and sent home. We keep track of the 5 top problems, health problems that people have, where people come in for something. And malaria is number 1. Diarrhea and respiratory tract infections kind of jockey back and forth for 2 and 3. Skin infections is always number 4. But it jockeys back and forth with pain. Musculoskeletal pain in the third world is a huge problem, and no one ever thinks about that. But these are folks that are working really hard under really difficult conditions, and it's amazing what 2 ibuprofen or 2 Tylenol can do to just give someone a break. And so that's always, it looks kind of weird when you look at the statistics, but it's actually a real phenomenon. The other thing that we do is teaching. This is an Irish anesthesiologist who is teaching neonatal resuscitation to the nurses. That means if a baby is not breathing after birth, what do you do? And so he's teaching the nurses what to do. And it's super interesting that about 3 or 4 weeks later, a nurse, not this one, but a different one, was in a health center. There was a baby that was born, was not breathing. The midwife didn't know what to do. The nurse, our nurse, came. He had a moment of panic. He like, oh my God, I don't know what to do either. But then he remembered. He went, wait a minute. Aiden showed me what to do. I know what to do. And he said while he was doing the resuscitation, Aiden was in his ear. He was talking to him. He was telling him what to do. And he saved that baby's life. So this is we also supported hospitals, and I don't have hardly any pictures of hospitals because in this particular place where I was working, it was a high security situation, and we were not allowed to take pictures in the hospital because you didn't know who you were going to be taking a picture of. But a lot of the hospitals look like this. This is a very typical kind of hospital. In this particular hospital in Central African Republic, we supported the pediatric ward, both regular and malnutrition. We supported the trauma ward and post-op. And for the surgery, we supported the sterilization, which means that we provided coal so that the stove or the fire top sterilizer would function, and we gave them paper and tape to do the sterilization, as well as some teaching. I also supervised the hygienists and the kitchen, so I got to be involved in helping the cooks, because you have to cook food for the people that are there. In other hospitals, we supported the lab. In that one we didn't. This is a lab, typical looking kind of scenario. The lab that we can do is very, very minimal. It's almost nothing. But the one thing that we can do is screen blood for blood donation, because anemia, whether related to anemia or whether related to malaria or to postpartum problems, hemorrhage, is truly a life-saving thing. So part of my job was to find blood donors, to bring them in for testing, and to see if there was anyone who was eligible. More often than not, there wasn't. And we had to screen a lot of people to find someone who's available. But sometimes we had tests to do anemia, checking for anemia, and sometimes we just drop down the eyelid and see if it looked pale, and if it's pale, that's anemia. Other times we were able to actually do the test. We did a lot of maternal health support. So this is a prenatal clinic where she is seeing a lot of women, maybe 100 women, one after the other, doing tests for syphilis, checking the urine, listening to the heart tone, and doing all the stuff. Sometimes we would have the capacity to do HIV testing, and sometimes we didn't. We could refer them for that testing, but not always do it there. So we did prenatal care. Then this is a typical delivery room. You can see the edge of the table in the lower right corner, the delivery table. There's a hand washing center in the middle. There's a box there. That's the cold chain box where we keep the oxytocin that's used in delivery if there's a bleeding issue. And then the gray little square is where you receive the baby. And there is a towel, so the baby does get dried off, but it's just a little foam thing with a depression in the middle. This is a postpartum and so after delivery and labor room in one of the health posts. So everything takes care in the same place. This is happens to be empty right now. The 2 midwives are there and another nurse, but sometimes it's quite busy and you can have up to 2 laboring women or 2 postpartum women per bed, which means 2 moms, 2 kids. It gets really crowded. The other thing that can save lives that's very simple is to provide safe birthing kits. And so this is a midwife who's way out in the bush, and so we brought safe birthing kits to her, which basically consisted of a bar of soap, some cord to tie the umbilical cord, a blade to cut the umbilical cord, a birth certificate, which is really important. People can't advance in life unless they have proof that they were born somewhere, and then menstrual pads. There's also underneath a towel that you can't really see, and each health center had gloves. So this was in an attempt to provide a clean birth. And this little girl right here was the first birth after we gave them the safe birthing kits. And as you can tell, she's doing super great. She's super chubby and super happy. The other thing that we were involved with a lot, or that I was in outreach, is malnutrition. We're screening for malnutrition all the time. Over on the table there are actually MUACs, which are the bands that you can put around the upper arm to check for malnutrition, and we do a lot of screening. This little girl we found on this, at one of our health posts. She was severely malnourished. We took her in. She was treated for a few weeks and then sent back, and as you can tell, she was a success. This child, same scenario, who we took in, and we were not able to successfully treat her. She was too far gone. And maybe one of the things that was a difference is that the other little girl, her mom was with her, and this little girl, her mom was not because she had died. So she was being taken care of by the neighbor. So having family is really important. This little girl is another success story. She was also severely malnourished, and we were able to take her back. When you treat malnutrition in the hospital, you have to have follow-up, and you follow them for quite a while. And this little girl was so funny because she was running all over the place with her giant dress, and you never would have guessed that a month ago that she was almost dead. You can't have MSF without logistics. Sometimes what you have to do is actually build the bridge to where you're going to, and that's what we're doing here. So building bridges, and then once you get to where you're going, you're building latrines and waste zones and all kinds of things. So MSF is not just for doctors. There's a whole group of people that are really important to sustain it. Period. The other thing that's really important, and they alluded to it in the video, is the community connections are the key to MSF. It's what makes us acceptable in communities and what keeps us going. These are actually IDPs, so internally displaced people. They're nomads, but they really have no place to nomad to. So these are the PUL. They're there, and every month we met with them in terms of establishing community relationships and ensuring our acceptance. After a while, the women said, no, we want to meet with you too. You can't meet together, so we met once a month with the women as well. And it's a way to find out what's going on in the community, and then also to provide healthcare or health information. So there was definitely an exchange there. You can't just pay attention to the Muslims or particular groups. You have to pay attention to everybody. So the chef de village, or the village chief, is someone who is key in being able to provide care. He can keep you in touch or give you information about security issues, infection issues, problems in the community. We actually didn't have a health post in this town, but he was key in terms of keeping us safe and keeping the community healthy.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. Are you wanting high-speed internet but don't have access to PUD fiber? Try Sky-Fi high-speed wireless internet from LocalTel. Call 888-8888 today. Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
So MSF became involved in search and rescue in 2015. This is the boat that we were on. This is called the Aquarius. It's run by Jasmine Shipping, which is German, and then SOS Mediterranean is the one who actually contracted with them to run the boat, and MSF is just there to provide medical and logistical support. So we lived and worked on this boat. We would go out for 3 weeks and work, and then come back for a long weekend. Usually in MSF, on all the projects, you work at least 6 days a week. And they try to let you have Sunday off, but it's hard work. So why are we there? We're there because there are people who are in the water, who are trying to get from the coast of Libya to somewhere, and so we're there to save lives. So we stay neutral, we stay out of the politics of it all, but we're there to help people who are fleeing. They're fleeing persecution, kidnapping, torture, and just lots of political and religious tension and strife. So there's a crew of about 38 on the boat. There are 3 teams. One is the ship's crew, which are basically the engineers and the able-bodied seamen and the cooks. They come from Russia, the Philippines, and Ghana. There's the SOS team, which are the people that actually pull people out of the water. They come mostly from Europe. And then there's the MSF team, which comes from all over the place. So this was the medical team when I was there. There's 4. There happens to be 5 because the person standing next to me is my replacement. So I was training her. So we were the nurses who provided care to people on the deck. The woman in the middle is the midwife, the next nurse is the emergency nurse, and then the doctor was on the far right. So that's the medical team that was there providing care to folks. So just to give a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about, this is Libya. It's kind of hard, it's kind of pale. And so there's routes that go, well, that's really pale. So right up here is Sicily and Italy, and so the routes are coming this way up to there, and that's where we were. There's other routes that are over to Spain and to Greece, but those are less important right now. The big one is in the middle. So since January of 2018, there have been 15,481 arrivals, 489 known deaths. So a lot of people, there are boats that leave from the coast. You have no idea who they are, if they got there. No one reports them missing or anything. And we actually had boats that would collapse, and they think there was more people, but they're not sure. And people would die from drowning. You can kind of see in the upper right corner that there's a graph with numbers of crossings versus deaths. You'll notice that the biggest year was in 2015 when there were 1 million crossings, but about 3,700 deaths. This in 2017 was 172,000, but 3,000 deaths. So what that means is the death rate hasn't really changed, but what has changed is that people are more desperate, it's more precarious, and so the percentage of people actually dying in the crossing is much, much higher. People come from all over the place. So there's, this is just a breakdown. This is information from the UN. People coming from Syria, Nigeria, Guinea, and at any one time, you can have up to 30 different countries represented on the boat. So they're all sitting there mixed together. We had 580 people who we had rescued from 30 different countries, which means 30 different languages and 30 different opinions about everything. So, Bangladesh is a big one, you'll see there. And then we actually had a group from Nepal. We had 10 guys from Nepal who were on the boat. So, the one thing that's important to remember is that of all the people that I saw, not one of them wanted to be there. Not one of them wanted to leave their home. They all wanted to stay home. They wanted to be with their family in their house, in their country, and they were leaving because they had no choice. And they ended up in Libya, where there were some difficulties in terms of torture and kidnapping and whatnot. And all of the people that I talked to, and I talked to a lot of people, said that it was worse to stay in Libya than take a chance dying in the ocean as you're trying to get away. So they were willing to take their families and cross the ocean just so that they could get away.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
Please join us weekly for the 12th District with yours truly, Carrie Condata. Check your channel guide for times or go to ncwlife.com for details.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
So what happens, how a rescue works, is that either a boat is spotted like this. There's a little boat in the middle there. That's a Kodiak or Zodiac. It has about 120 people on it, maybe up to 150. So either we find them or someone reports them to Rome, and Rome tells us to go and to rescue them. So the first thing is life jackets. So we get life jackets ready to hand out to the people. This little boat is called a rib, and this is the boat that goes out to the boat that we're rescuing people from. And we don't work alone. Sometimes we are alone, but other times there's other people who are there, and we work in tandem at the direction of Rome. So we go out and with the life jackets. Sometimes, if it's known that a boat could collapse in the water, we send out a banana, which is this thing that goes out, and it's like just like a big giant inner tube, and people can actually hang on to it and last quite a while, because the water isn't that cold there. The problem is they don't know how to swim, and they just go down. They don't know how to come back up again. So as long as they can get onto this, they're probably going to live. Then the medical team is getting ready. So the 5 medical team, we each have our roles in terms of what we do, and we get all excited, we're ready to go, and then the word comes, stop. And there's a lot of waiting on the boat, and the reason is that Rome is deciding who's going to send people to rescue. Sometimes there's other actors that are involved, they're trying to decide, and so sometimes we end up waiting for a long time. And this is probably the worst part of being on the boat, because you know the people are there and you know they could drown, but they're waiting to make the decisions that they make. And so we wait. And then we get the word that we are able to go out. We go out to get the folks. First they get life jackets. And the main thing is to keep people calm, because as soon as they start getting anxious, the boats start to tip and they go over. Women and children are always first, and we get them into those little rib boats as fast as we can. Sometimes the rescues happen at night, so you're actually doing this in the dark, which is always kind of interesting. After the boat is emptied, this is a boat. This is what it looks like when it's empty. You can see there's an engine on the back, 2 gas cans, and there's definitely not enough gas to get them all the way to Italy. So they're basically given enough to get them into international waters. At this point, we mark it as a SAR boat, and then it's stabbed and it sinks, and the engine is thrown overboard so it won't get used again. My job was to greet people. I greeted every single person that came on the boat. I shook their hand and said, hello, how are you? And then they were divided into men and children into one section, and women and children into one section, and men into another section. These are men who are doing well. They're being processed. So this is where that vulnerability part comes in. We start identifying people who have vulnerabilities. And basically, there's no names. It's age, gender, where do you come from, how, that kind of thing. Later, if people have secret things that they want to talk about, they have the opportunity to give those more difficult things, to tell us about those more difficult things. When people come off the boat, it can be off the little boats onto our big boat. We see a lot of things. The big thing is probably dehydration. If it's cold out, we see hypothermia, which means that they're too cold. And they're weak. Sometimes they're weak from either one of those 2 things, but sometimes they're just weak from the psychological relief of having made it. They didn't die. And so they'll start walking up the ladder and start to collapse, and we go, no, 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 you can do it, you made us this far, keep walking. And we get them on the boat and we assess them for what's going on. Besides We also see a lot of skin conditions. When you mix gasoline with seawater, it creates this really toxic chemical that causes really severe burns on the skin. So if we smell any fuel, they get a shower immediately to get that fuel off. And then, of course, like I said, the psychological trauma of just having made it. We also see a lot of skin conditions. This little baby, I don't know if you can see her wrists, but that's scabies. And her whole body was covered with scabies. And when you come out of the detention centers, the hygiene there is really bad, and anywhere from about 80 to 90% will have scabies. We also see a lot of skin trauma, or trauma and skin infections, and usually it's old. So they may have had this for months or weeks, and we do what we can on the deck, assess and treat as much as we can. You can see that there's a rescue in the back there. So the rescue's going on, we're on the deck doing care. If we can treat it on the deck, we do. If we can't, then we take them to what we call the hospital. We have to feed people, so everybody gets dry clothes when they get on the boat. So they change into those clothes, they get energy bars, and they get one hot meal a day. This is when we assess also for illness and to see how they're doing. Everybody has to stand up, go stand in line, and we check for infection. And we also check to see who didn't get up, because it's the people who don't get up for food are the ones that you really have to worry about. Then the conditions on the boat are very crowded. This is not a cruise. Everyone's jammed in together. They sleep. They are given blankets so that they have a blanket. And we're constantly circulating, looking for people that are ill, who have questions, who have needs. And then we get to Italy. And so this is their first sign where they see Italy. They're very happy, they're ecstatic, they're not going to die, but they also don't understand that it's going to be really difficult once they get there. So they're all lined up, ready to go, and you can see that there's a lot of different colors here, a lot of different, they come from a lot of different places. And when you get to Italy, the boat is quarantined, so the Ministry of Health has to come on and assesses for infectious diseases, primarily tuberculosis. So they come on in full hazmat suits from head to toe, and we're standing there with our t-shirts and jeans, and we've been hanging out with these folks for 2 days. So, but they clear us, and then they can go. So this is an example of young men. These are unaccompanied minors. They have yellow bracelets on their wrists, which means they are probably about 15 or 16 years old, and they have been making this journey by themselves. And the journey didn't start in Libya. It started in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in Algeria, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, all over the place. And so with that identification, it allows them to get a little bit of extra care. So they are greeted by the Italian authorities. They get fingerprinted, photographed, a medical exam, and they also get assessed by the Red Cross. The Red Cross is the group that tries to unite families. Every person comes with the name of, almost everyone, name of someone and a phone number inside their clothes or attached to them somehow, and they will do their best to get people reunited. This is the last we see of these people, very intense relationship for maybe 2 days, and then they're gone. So we go and have a beer. Because the boat is dry, there's no alcohol in the boat, we have 1 or 2 hours in port, so we all go get a beer really quick, and then we get back on the boat, and it starts all over again. So when we're out for 3 weeks, we may go into port a few times. Sometimes we will transfer people to another boat, but right now, the MSF boat, the Aquarius, is the only one that's in the Mediterranean that's actively working. Some of the people will get picked up by fishermen, some of the Coast Guards are there, the cargo boats will sometimes pick up people, and we work very closely with all of them, basically always with the same goal of saving lives. So why did I do MSF? Why did I go back? Because after the first time when you saw those pictures, you go, why would anyone go back and do that? It's just like crazy. But I go back and I keep going back, and I'm actually going to go back next week, probably to Ethiopia. Because I really like MSF. I love MSF. It's an incredible organization. It's ethical. It's their business practices are good, and the way they treat people in terms of their workers and the people that they take care of is incredible. And I really appreciate that. I like being able to work with people who wouldn't have access to care otherwise, or who have never had access to care, even the most minimal, and to be able to give that to people, and also to treat them with dignity and respect, because a lot of people have not been treated with dignity and respect, and this is where I always cry, to be able to do that is really something. The other thing I like is just working with people from all over the world who have the same mission, who have the same goal, who have the same vision, and to be able to work with them is really exciting. And on a personal level, anytime you can save one little kid's life, like this little pumpkin head, or this one, it's why not? You got to go back because they're there.
Have a fun video you'd like to see featured on NCW Life? Email us at newsphotos@ncwlife.com.